Hi there. This coming video is for anybody who is experiencing a knocking sound or problem with their Saris H3. And I just want to state up front that while I didn't mention it in the video, the first thing I checked were the little end caps on the axles, so the dropout caps. I can't remember if on my unit they were too tight or too loose, but I did check them. And while tightening them up may help a little bit, I don't believe that is the root cause of the knocking sound, at least not the type that I experienced in this video. So enjoy and let me know what you think. Hey folks, so I've had my Saris H3 for, I don't know, about 2 months. Had a couple issues with it. Initially, when I bought it, I was just really shocked at the lag that it took for the resistance to kick in. My Elite, it was probably like 1.5 seconds before it would respond to the way that Zwift says on the screen, the incline on the screen. This one is almost 3 seconds. So, I get that it's well reported and it's out there on lots of blogs, and DC Rainmaker has written about it, but a 3-second delay might be bearable on a long climb, but if you're racing, especially if you're racing on in Crit City, where you have those rollers, by the time your trainer has caught up with the resistance, you're going downhill. So I'm getting like 6 and 7% downhill, minus 6 and 7% uphill on the Saris in that scenario. Anyway, given that it's probably working as designed, that was the conversation I had with the Saris support guy. Then I got this knocking that you can probably hear. That's internal. I'm just spinning. If I can give you a look at that. It happens once the trainer gets warm. It doesn't really happen with a consistent tap. It just, sometimes it goes a bit faster, sometimes it goes a bit slower, but it's loud. And so I got back in touch with Saris. Now it's coronavirus time, so it's understandable, right, that phone lines are closed, you can't call anyone. And I get it, so just pick up with the email thread, right? But they won't respond at all. I've made 2 YouTube videos of this sound, and I've kept them private because it's not, it's not about shaming the manufacturer. I just want the support guy to see it and to tell me what he thinks. Can't get anything out of them. It's been 3 weeks, maybe about 3 weeks I've been chasing them. And the purpose for this video is to show you me taking this thing apart and trying to fix the click. So I'm just pulling the first set of screws out of the side of the Saris, and the first thing to note is that these bolts are hex bolts, not Torx, but they are not metric. They are imperial, I guess, maybe because this, I think this is made in the US, but that doesn't mean it has to be imperial. But anyway, these are imperial, and they are 1/8. So don't use a 3mm Allen wrench and strip these. Use a 1/8. Good news is that pretty decent hardware. Don't strip easily because they're really in there. They're in there with a fair amount of torque, or maybe not torque because it's I don't know if you can see that, but it's been locked. These bolts have been Loctited in. All right, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these, and then 2 Torx bolts, which I'll get out separately. So the 2 Torx bolts at the bottom of the unit, here and here, are T30s. You're going to probably need a long socket to get to it, and they appear to be held in, so I can't pull them out to show you, but they were not Loctited in. I think they weren't actually screwed on that tightly. They're about 10 Newton meters in terms of force. And this shroud on the side then just lifts off. See the 2 bolts, oh, maybe you can't see the 2 bolts sticking out there, to reveal the unit. Okay, so I've only had the cover off for about a minute now, and I've already got a pretty good candidate for where the problem is. But before I show you that, I just want to point out one thing. I keep this trainer extremely clean. I don't sweat on it. I've only used it a few times, or a handful of times. And if you have a look down here, you see all kinds of bits of, I don't know, black rubber or plastic shavings all down the bottom of the trainer. When I more closely inspected this, I don't know, the fan wheel, I guess we'll call it, it's made of plastic, and you can see, hopefully you can see that, you can see the wear marks on either, says rough, it's rough to the touch on either side where the belt runs. Now this clearly isn't totally flat, or the belt isn't totally flat. The belt is actually grooved on the inside, and this wheel is not grooved. So maybe there's a slight kind of dip in there in order to keep in order to help keep the belt like straight onto the edge of the wheel. But in any case, you can see it's been wearing off. See all those scratch marks? That's probably what's caused all of this material to flake off on the inside of the trainer. Now look, in terms of the noise, this may not be the answer, but initially, listen to this. Sorry, it's been out of focus. There you go. There's a movement here within this wheel, and a couple of thoughts about that. This is the tensioner, which I could back off here, back off the 3 bolts, rotate the tensioner, take the tension off the belt, pull this off, and just have a look and see whether there's something underneath which could be slightly tightened up. I don't want to, I don't want to mess up anything at all here, right? This is too expensive for me just to be messing around with. The biggest problem with that plan, though, is that getting this tensioner back to exactly where it should be. I mean, I could probably do it, right? I could record the number of turns I do here. But what I'm beginning to think already is that I'm okay with the noise. It doesn't seem to be, if this moves slightly, I'm still having to put probably almost the same amount of force down to turn this belt as I would do if it wasn't moving. I think the calibration probably doesn't account for that noise for any play in this part of the system. The calibration will only account for how fast you're actually pushing against the resistance. And I'll have a little think about it. I mean, maybe slightly. Again, another option might be tightening the tension a little bit, but then all you're doing is putting more force on these bearings. And again, it's not. I don't know what all the tolerances are for this unit. So anyway, food for thought. I'm going to have a little more think about it, and then I'll let you know. Okay, guys. I cleaned up the mess, and I went with taking the band off. It was pretty easy, really easy actually. I took a picture of where these bolts were first. I backed off the spring. I've held this retainer that just kind of sits, that sits over here. I don't think this is technically challenging at all. It won't be a problem to get this back together at the same tension. Again, key is to make sure you know where these bolts are going to sit, and obviously, get a good hand feel as well for it, and try to record the number of turns too. One thing I could have done probably is marked the threads where it actually was sitting, although I don't know if you can see here, there's very much an obvious line there on that one thread where it has never been screwed in. So I'm pretty confident with that. And now look at this. That's got to be the source of my noise. I'm pretty confident that that's it. So again, I'm going to try and pop this free hub and see what's underneath. Okay, super easy to get the free hub off. You just unscrew this top cap here. It's got a flat size. I think it's around about a 15 mil. I didn't have 15 mil cone wrench, so I used a crescent wrench, but I was very careful because it's got obviously black anodized. Underneath that, yeah, that's it. You can actually just pull the free hub up, and you don't have to be too careful of the pulls going everywhere because they're holding with a lock ring. So that's easy. Obviously make sure everything's clean before you do this, because this is a new unit. I'm not having any issues. And then there's a little collar here that just slides off, no problem. And then you have I'm wiggling it now for the movement, and I'll just show you how this is made. This whole fan piece just slides right off, and there's a bearing inside there with some sort of collar on the inside that just fits directly onto this collar here. What I need to figure out is whether the movement is coming from the bearing itself, or from sort of too much tolerance between the inner diameter of this ring here and the outer diameter of that ring there. It's actually very, very hard to see with the naked eye, but the plot thickens because I don't know yet. I need to really have a much closer look and think about how to test this. But it could just be the bearing. And if it's the bearing, then it's just a case of removing that lock ring there that you see and getting a replacement bearing. Now, I may have to get that replacement bearing actually from Saris, because it looks like this internal collar may be integrated. Anyway, let me have another think. Okay guys, sorry for geeking out a bit on you here, but it's it's all part of solving the problem. If you have a look at the bearings on the inside of this this wheel, you see that groove right in the middle there? That's actually not a groove. There's two sets of bearings in here, and the bearings themselves are pretty readily available. I think they also double up as some bottom bracket bearings, so they're around. If you just get the codes off the side, you can get the exact bearing. And they're enduro bearings. They're not cheap. So it's hard for me to say that the movement itself is within the bearing, but it's also really hard to see where the movement is coming from. And part of the thing that makes that hard to see is that above the two bearings, you've got this little washer collar that shifts around. It's a little bit bigger in diameter. The ID is bigger, so it doesn't really rub against anything. It's just there, I guess, to hold the bearings in the right place. And so that makes it really hard to see, because that moves, and that's supposed to move. So I just kind of gave it a try putting the fan wheel on upside down carefully with no force applied. So I'm not going to break anything or damage anything. Just dropping it on the collar there to see whether the movement, which is still very much here, is coming from the bearing or from a gap between the internal diameter of the bearings and the collar. And I think it's coming from a gap between the internal diameter of the bearings and the collar. So now I have a choice. I don't think there's any such thing as a shim stock that is so tiny. I just have to think a little bit about what I can do that isn't permanent, and maybe it's a type of Loctite. It's not like a headset where it's taking all kinds of forces from all kinds of directions. The type of force that these bearings will take will always come from one direction, regardless of whether you're pedaling hard or not pedaling hard. So I actually feel pretty confident if I get the right Loctite, that I can basically put some on the inside of these two bearings against that collar, and hopefully it will stay. I mean, I definitely don't want to do anything too permanent, which means I can't lift this off again and replace the bearings in the future. Another thing that's crossed my mind is, look, while I have this out, why don't I just buy new bearings, just in case that will help with the problem. I may yet do that, probably do a little bit more thinking, and maybe try one of the softer Loctite solutions after a little bit of research. Okay, that's where I've been working. It's an unfinished basement, is where I have my Zwift set up and all my bikes. You guys are not going to believe what just happened. I'm in the middle of filming this for you. The last piece of video I took was maybe 4 or 5 minutes ago. And as I'm thinking about, what to do, I just got an email from Saris, from my support guy in Saris, who hasn't been responding to me for, I think it's around about 3 weeks. And he just wrote back, pretty simple sentence: hey, I'm sorry I didn't see all your emails. Send me your shipping address and proof of purchase, and we'll ship you out a new H3. So I guess that means I don't have to record this video anymore. But it's maybe you learned something from what's happened here. But if Saris support is really good, then maybe nobody in the world will have to do what I've just done, or really think about doing what I've just done. It's going to be very easy for me to get this back together into exactly the format that it was. Actually be cleaner than it was before I opened it. So I feel my conscience is clear about that, and I'll probably publish this video at some point to help people who have knocking problems who maybe are out of warranty. Because I think where I was going with this is, go ahead and buy 2 new bearings anyway. They're not massively expensive. And before you slot them in, put them on the collar, right, and have a real look for a gap there. Now I was also thinking, I was going to try and video it, but it was really tiny, that there really is a gap between the internal diameter of the bearing and the external diameter of the collar. And so, yeah, I was actually going to Google the Loctite types, and see which wouldn't be too hard to bond the thing on so I could never get it off again, but maybe soft enough, but maybe hard enough just to kind of prevent that rocking. And honestly, I think we were in with a really good chance of fixing the problem with going down that road. The overall message from this video is, if you have a sound just like mine, I don't think it's a problem. I don't think it's taking any watts away from you. I don't think it's going to be a long-term problem. Probably not contributing to the wear on the bearings. Certainly not doing any damage to the unit. It's pretty loud, and it gets into your mind. For me, it was happening when the trainer was really warm, and I think maybe it was just something to do with kind of dislodging. I just actually want to show you one more thing before I sign off, because I'm super happy. I'm going to get a new trainer. But let me show you one more thing that sort of supports the theory that I just put forwards. Give me 1 sec, and I'll switch this around. Okay, so if you have a close look at the collar here, it's going to be hard to see, but I'll give it a shot. There you go. You see there are a couple of wear marks. Like you can see that nothing is spinning around this, so it's not actually wearing, but there's a couple of contact marks. And that to me indicates that something has been rocking a little bit and shining this up. There's a 3 or 4 millimeter length sort of smooth piece there, and a 3 or 4 millimeter length smooth piece here. And I'm looking around a little bit for other, and there's other bits and pieces, but that in particular is very worn. Now, honestly, it could have just looked like that after the machining process, but I'm wondering if, because it's at the top as well, the rocking of the bearings is actually causing that. And again, I'm really confident now that this is probably it, and that a bit of the right material within here on the bearing, something that you can still kind of pull off later, but would just serve as, I mean, maybe just on one side or half, because again, the pull on the bearings is very consistent on the flywheel, so on this fan wheel. So yeah, anyway, I'm super happy with what just happened. And again, if Saris support are on their game, nobody's really going to have to use this video ever. But if you have an older Saris, and maybe in a few years when these things are still out there but not supported, you may find this video useful. Best of luck. Post if you have the problem, and if you can fix it with some of my suggestions. It'd be really interesting to know.